The lake hadn't changed. It still glistened like polished glass under the morning sun, framed by pines that stretched tall and undisturbed. Wind danced lightly across the water, brushing it just enough to stir reflections of the sky. This place, this remote pocket of wilderness, had been in my family for over 100 years. My grandfather built the cabin here with his bare hands. My father fortified it, and after years away, I had finally returned to restore it. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of my pickup truck. The scent of pine needles and old timber wrapped around me like a homecoming. I looked at the faded red siding, the weather-worn porch, the stone chimney that still stood proud against time. It needed work, but it was mine. I took a deep breath, letting the air settle in my chest. After years of service overseas and months tangled in legal paperwork to settle my father's estate, this cabin was my reset button. Peace, solitude, and a chance to rebuild both the house and myself. And then she showed up. A white BMW rolled up the gravel path as if it owned the mountain. The engine cut sharply, and out stepped a woman who looked like she walked out of a country club catalog. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a pastel cardigan tied over her shoulders like she was headed for brunch. She held a clipboard like a weapon. She didn't introduce herself, just narrowed her eyes and said, "You can't park here." I turned slowly, unsure if I heard her right. "Excuse me, this is HOA property," she said, already scribbling something down. "We don't allow non-residents to park in this section, especially not in that." Her nose curled as she nodded at my dusty old truck. I blinked. "I live here," she scoffed. "I don't think so. I'm Karen Swenson, president of the Lakeshore Serenity HOA, and your name is not on any of our resident rolls." "That's because this property doesn't belong to the HOA," I replied calmly. "This is private land. Been in the Warren family for over a century." She tilted her head with a smirk, lips pinched. "The HOA oversees all the properties along the lake. This one's no exception. I don't care what stories you've been told. If you can't provide current occupancy papers, I'm going to have to report you as a squatter." I raised a brow. "I have the deed. The county recognizes this cabin as independent land, not under HOA jurisdiction." She looked me over like I was tracking mud across her marble floors. "We'll see what the sheriff says about that." Karen turned on her heel, stomped back to her car, and drove off, spitting gravel and indignation behind her. I stood still for a moment, letting the silence return. She was wrong. I had the paperwork, the history, the legal standing, but something about the way she spoke, the arrogance, the immediate assumption that I didn't belong struck deeper than just territorial posturing. It wasn't just about rules or boundaries. It was about control. She wasn't used to hearing no. That night, I sat on the porch with a lantern lit beside me and the cabin's front door finally hanging straight again. I sipped coffee from my thermos, staring across the still lake. The frogs were croaking in the distance, and the sky was beginning to scatter stars across its canvas. Then headlights appeared again. Karen's BMW idled at the bottom of the drive before vanishing back into the trees. I had a feeling this was just the beginning. But if Karen Swenson thought she could bully me off land that's been in my blood for generations, she was about to find out I didn't back down. Is not on my land, and especially not to someone who thought a clipboard gave her power. By midweek, Karen had declared war. It started with passive-aggressive notes taped to my truck, pinned to the cabin's door, even stuffed in my mailbox like confetti from a tyrant. Each one was a typed warning. "You are in violation of HOA. Aesthetic guidelines or unregistered dwellings are subject to removal." She signed them all with flourish. "Karen Swenson, HOA president." I ignored them, let her file her reports. I had the deed, the tax records, and a notarized boundary map tucked in a file by my bed. Her claims were empty threats, annoying but harmless until she escalated the next morning. I was using a chainsaw to clear a fallen cedar when a black and white patrol car pulled up behind me. I shut off the saw and turned to see a deputy stepping out, one hand resting casually on his belt. "Morning," I called out, wiping sweat from my brow. "You call Warren?" "I am. Got a call from the Lakeshore Serenity HOA about unauthorized logging and disturbance." I blinked. "That tree was rotting and fell during the storm 2 nights ago. It's on my property." He scratched his head, glancing around. "You got proof of that?" "Sure do. Deed's in my truck, back seat." As I handed over the document, another vehicle rolled in. Karen's white BMW. She climbed out with the drama of a soap opera star. Lips tight, phone clutched like a grenade. "I told you he was dangerous," she said loudly, approaching the deputies, felling trees, destroying wildlife habitat, possibly building illegally. "He doesn't belong here." The deputy glanced at the papers, then at me. "This checks out. Property line ends where your fence begins." "Ma'am." Karen's face went pale. "You can't just believe a piece of paper." He nodded politely. "This piece of paper comes from the county assessor's office. If you have a problem, you'll need to take it up with them, not me." Karen spun on her heel and stormed off again. But this time she didn't drive away. She parked right across from the cabin, arms folded across her chest, and stared. I waved, then went back to sawing. Over the next few days, the harassment became routine. Noise complaints, environmental violations, Accusations of unauthorized construction when I nailed new support beams onto the porch. One morning I found pink paint splattered across my front steps in the shape of an X. A coincidence, maybe, but the cameras I installed later that night suggested otherwise. The footage caught her hoodie-up face tilted just out of frame. Still, the strut was unmistakable. The slow, smug pace of someone who believed they were untouchable, but the breaking point came a week later. I was unloading lumber from my trailer when I heard sirens again, 2 squad cars, lights flashing. Karen stood on the edge of the gravel, this time flanked by 2 HOA board members I hadn't yet met, one with a clipboard, the other with a DSLR camera. The deputy who stepped out wasn't the one from before. He had a sterner face, eyes already scanning like he expected trouble. "Mr. Warren," he said, "we received a call about a potential squatter refusing to vacate HOA land again," I muttered, more amused than angry. "Sir, may I see your ID and property documentation?" Karen stepped forward. "I've warned him. He's belligerent, threatening. He's taking advantage of a technicality." "I'm taking advantage of owning my own land," I said, handing the documents over. "Check the county's GIS records. This parcel predates the HOA by 70 years. The deputy reviewed the file. After several minutes he nodded. "He's right. This land's not under your jurisdiction." Karen's eyes went wide. "There must be a mistake." "No mistake," the deputy said. "This cabin stands on private, exempt land." She turned to me, her voice lowering, trembling just beneath her words. "You think this is over?" I stepped closer, just enough for her to hear me. "You've mistaken silence for surrender. That's your first mistake." She turned, humiliated, and marched back to her car engine revving, tires spitting gravel in retreat. As the deputies drove off and dusk settled across the tree line, I looked out over the lake, its waters calm again, untouched by the madness on shore. But inside I knew peace was temporary. Karen wasn't done, and neither was I. By the time Karen's third police call failed to get me evicted, her approach changed from bluster to sabotage. It began subtly. My mail stopped arriving. Packages marked delivered were nowhere to be found. The internet tower I'd just paid to connect mysteriously lost signal. When I checked the junction box near the road, the wires had been sliced clean, jagged like they'd been clipped with bolt cutters. Then came the night my truck wouldn't start. I popped the hood to find the fuel line deliberately slashed. I filed police reports, of course, set up motion cameras, documented everything, but I didn't retaliate, not yet. I let her feel victorious, believing her passive-aggressive terror campaign was working. But what Karen didn't know, what no one in Lakeshore Serenity knew, was that she wasn't harassing a stranger squatting in a cabin. She was provoking the owner of the very land beneath her manicured sidewalks. My grandfather was a shrewd man. When developers approached him decades ago about turning his lakeside acreage into a luxury community, he agreed under one condition: the land would be leased, not sold. 99-year lease, non-renewable, ironclad. The homeowners might own their houses but not the land. That stayed in the Warren Trust when my father passed. I inherited the trust, the cabin, and all rights to enforce the lease terms once it expired. And it expired in 4 months. All those homes, Karen's included, stood on land I would soon control outright. I could raise fees, revoke access, even reclaim properties for non. I had waited silently, honoring my father's wishes, hoping the residents would prove good stewards. Karen changed that. She forced my hand. That week I contacted my attorney. We drafted certified letters to every HOA homeowner, informing them of the pending land transition. I included parcel maps, historical lease records, and updated terms that would go into effect upon expiration. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Karen tried to spin it as a fraud at the next HOA board meeting, which I attended as a guest. Document packet in hand, she stood at the podium and declared, "This is a hostile takeover from someone who was never supposed to be here." I stood when she finished and calmly laid my documents on the table. "My family built this lake community before most of your homes were even designed. What you call Lakeshore Serenity was Warren Ridge long before there was a homeowners association. The only reason your HOA exists is because my grandfather allowed it. Now that lease is ending, you can either work with me or move." The room fell into stunned silence. One board member, a wiry man with thick glasses, spoke first. "You mean he really owns the land beneath our houses?" Karen tried to shout him down. "This is a scare tactic. He's just trying to bully his way in." "No, ma'am," I said. "You did that when you tried to use the sheriff to run me off my own property." A woman in the back raised her hand. "What happens if we don't agree to the new terms?" "Your HOA dissolves," I replied. "You'll owe new land use fees directly to me. Community access roads will be restricted, and common areas like the clubhouse and Lakefront Park will become private Warren land once more." Karen stood frozen, face blank. The power she had clung to wielded like a sword against neighbors, enforced with petty fines and intimidation, was crumbling beneath her, and she knew it. Later that night she came to the cabin. No clipboard, no pastel cardigan, just a knock on the door and a forced smile. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I opened the screen but didn't step aside. Why? I think we got off on the wrong foot, she said, voice brittle. Perhaps we can renegotiate some of your terms. Privately, I looked her in the eye. There won't be any backroom deals. Karen, that's how you ran the HOA. That ends now. She hesitated. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked smaller, deflated. I just wanted to protect the neighborhood. She muttered. No, I said. You wanted control, and you used fear to get it. She turned without another word, walking back into the dark. As I closed the door behind her, I knew the final chapter was coming, and I would write it on my own land, with my own name on my own terms. August 1st arrived like a silent hammer at dawn. Contractors deployed by my attorney posted new signage at every entry road. Private property. Warren Land Trust trespassers will be prosecuted. Fencing crews marked off the lakefront, the clubhouse, and the so-called community garden that Karen once proudly featured in her monthly newsletter. Residents awoke to discover their reality. Rewritten HOA bylaws had no more teeth. Karen's once feared citations now belonged to the recycling bin. The authorities she'd wielded like a throne had vanished, replaced by legally binding land use agreements that bore my name at the bottom. That emails began flooding in. Some were furious, others panicked, a few were conciliatory. One elderly couple thanked me, said Karen had fined them $500 for leaving wind chimes on their back porch. Another mother said she was relieved to no longer fear walking her dog past Karen's curb. By noon the HOA board had resigned. That evening I walked along the lakeshore, now quiet except for the gentle lap of water against the dock. From my cabin porch, I watched families pack U-Hauls crawled out of the neighborhood, headlights like ants fleeing a flood. Then I saw her Karen standing in front of the now shuttered clubhouse. No crowd, no clipboard, just her and a row of wilting roses. She approached slowly, her footsteps almost hesitant. I suppose this is what victory looks like, she said. I stayed seated, mug in hand. Depends who you ask. She glanced at the cabin, its fresh paint and new porch railings gleaming against the sunset. I spent 15 years building that neighborhood, organizing everything, keeping it clean, keeping it controlled. I corrected. There's a difference. Karen sighed, the sound more human than anything I'd heard from her before. I was trying to protect the property values. People need rules. People need respect, I replied. You didn't offer that. You enforced obedience. She looked down at the mug in my hands. I don't suppose you'd ever consider letting me stay. I didn't answer right away. I remembered the sabotage, the cut lines, the police calls, the paint on my steps. And I remembered my grandfather's words, a man doesn't fight for revenge. He fights for peace and the right to live on his own terms. No, I said softly, but I'll give you 30 days to vacate. You'll get that much grace. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening, and turned away without another word. By the end of the month, the BMW was gone. Her rose bushes pulled from the soil. The once dominant queen of lakeshore serenity disappeared like fog at sunrise. In her absence, something remarkable happened. The community began to breathe. Without the neighbors started helping each other. They organized their own gatherings, less polished, more heartfelt. A group of kids built a tree house in a pine near the lake. No one stopped them. No one filed complaints. A retired vet offered free repairs to elderly residents. People waved again. The land returned to what it had once been, a shared space, not a controlled environment. And me, I turned the old cabin into something more than a home, a haven. The dock became a spot where kids fished and elders told stories. I opened a trail through the woods with plaques about the land's history, my family's history. The townspeople voted to name it Warren Trail. One evening, as I sat on the porch sipping black coffee, a boy about 12 came up the steps. Mr. Warren, he asked, is it true you own everything? I smiled. Just the land, not the people. The big difference, he grinned. That's cool. Respect the land, I said. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you. He nodded and ran off, skipping down the path barefoot. That night, the stars above the lake seemed clearer than ever. Maybe because peace had finally returned. Not the kind you inherit, but the kind you earn through patience, through resolve, through knowing when to stand your ground. Karen came to conquer, I came home, and in the end, the land remembered who it truly belonged to.